Woof, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another podcast of Parallel Barking, where woof, woof, Larry Backer will be barking in parallel with my daughter, Ariana. Ariana,
Yip.
why don't you bark a hello?
Yip, yip.
Figures. So you already know what you're in for in this podcast. Today, we have a very interesting podcast. We read that yesterday, Portugal joined a number of other European states. This is a trend that started probably a little after 2010. I'm aware of the German effort in 2014, the French variation in 2017, and now Portugal yesterday, that have this not so much a right to disconnect, but to impose limitations on the ability or the right of an employer to contact their employees outside of certain times, outside of business hours or whatever. In its biggest guise, of course, it's a right to disconnect. And in its smallest guise, it either requires companies to set up times when they won't, except in an emergency, that's Germany's case, that they won't contact their employers. Sometimes it's limited to email, sometimes it's any contact. In Portugal, it's any contact after working hours. I haven't read the laws in particular, but that we're not doing a specific legal analysis. But it's a great segue into work-life balance and COVID. This is a COVID thing, and so Ariana, you work for a living. What is your sense of this kind of thing, and the stories maybe that you've heard around the US in your perambulations about this kind of trend?
Well, it's really, I mean, it's interesting because in my experience, it has not been a very popular notion in America to cut communication off with your employer after work hours. It is more instead impressive to keep on going after you are done with work. You're actually signaling to your fellow employees and your superiors that you are in fact a very dedicated, valuable addition to whatever company you're part of by doing that. And if you don't do that, a lot of people have come to the thought that they might risk being let go. And so a lot of companies, around the world are trying to make remote work permanent now after the pandemic. So how do we deal with the separation between work and home? What is the separation? Is there a separation?
But that's precisely sort of what's going on. If in fact what you say is true, and it happens everywhere, for example, recall that in China, you've had a number of protests among people your age and younger about the notion of having to work, 9 hours a day.
The 996.
Yeah, the 996 and the fight against 996. But isn't that the whole point? If what you're saying is true, then it sounds like in order to break this culture, one that employees embrace as aggressively as, coming down from the top, that you need a law to make this possible. That's number one. And number two, do you think it's going to be effective?
It will be as effective as it is able to be enforced, I guess. So
let me give you an example. All right, so the law says that an employer can't contact an employee after hours, but I'm clever and I will say, I'm not going to contact you, but my phone is always on. And so if you need to contact me, you can contact me, and here's all the expectations we have. Are in other words, no matter how you write a law, are there ways around
There
this so that
absolutely.
so
And
that
I
it,
do, yes, the you're absolutely right. Someone could say, I would expect you to contact me anytime, especially when, there are certain deadlines that need to be met, dot, dot, dot.
right? And of course, you're always open for business.
Yeah, yeah.
And but here's the question then. In some jurisdictions, I imagine that this applies to everyone, including managerial employees,
Of course.
so that you can't contact anyone and no one can contact. The idea is, I guess, that people can't contact each other. But is it still, if you were an employer, could you figure out ways to get around this?
Isn't that true of any law, though? You can find ways to get around.
Okay, so we're signaling. But you, and the reason I'm asking that is because that's how you started, by looking at this. Well, in fact, the reason why in part that we have all of this imbalance is, the conditions of work, the ambitions of people, and that communications, especially these heroic communications 24/7, are in part an important signaling device, not anything having to do with competence or efficiency, but having to do with kind of the equivalent of sacrifices of allegiance and
Yeah.
sacrifices of commitment. And if that's the case, and if the law is also signaling, right, what we have is a bunch of people running around doing all kinds of things that are unbalanced, although they would argue, well, maybe my balance is 24/7 work, and my partner and my kids, assuming I have the time to have either, can
Right.
fend for themselves. That all of this really doesn't go to what it's supposedly going to, which is greater production, more efficient markets and productivity and the like, but it's going to something else. It's going to cultures of power, right? And these are all sacrifices that are meant to prove allegiance, so that in effect, what we're really dealing with here are these complex systems of allegiance and
Yes.
allegiance proving of loyalty, rather than anything having to do with economics. And yet when people talk about this, they talk about it either from the sociological perspective, oh, we know what the proper work-life balance is, and this is not it. Or we talk about it from the perspective of economics. Oh, this is the evils of, choose your system, of Marxist Leninism, the Chinese problem, or of capitalism, right? The American or European problem. It's something other than what it appears to be, which is all y'all crazy people running around trying to signal your loyalty. I am loyal to you. Choose me.
I mean,
Sacrifice that other person.
even the
But choose
language
me.
we use is aligned with that allegiance. If you do this for me, I will tell this person what a great job you've done for me, and this, and this. They will know. And if you do this, these people will know, and this is what will happen.
Now, you see, that's really interesting, because if what you're saying is true, and I have no doubt that what you're saying is true, then what it sounds like is that work really isn't work, and that in fact, all of these stories that we've been told about work and about the purchasing of labor doesn't seem to be true, right? There isn't an economic transaction in which for a sum certain, you produce a fixed and agreed upon quantity of effort, right? You're purchasing labor. You don't invest in labor, you only invest in capital. So unless you convert yourself into money, you're not an investment, you're merely an object that's purchased. But these laws really provide evidence that is propaganda, and that if we're looking at this carefully, you're not just purchasing labor, you are purchasing service, and perhaps more than purchasing service, you are purchasing servants.
Mhm.
And then the question really, then we get to that question that we're not supposed to ask. If in fact what we're doing is purchasing servants, right? Then when we are purchasing labor, are we purchasing a person or are we purchasing their production?
Their production or their services.
But there's a huge
Nope.
difference, because if
Yes.
I am purchasing a person who's now been objectified, that takes us perilously close to the battle days ending in the 1880s in Brazil and in
Mhm.
the 1860s here, that suggests that indeed the fundamental or a possible end of the spectrum of fundamental acceptable labor practices is one grounded in servitude, but a servitude that gives the person who's buying supposedly services, you're not buying services, you're buying the body of the person that you're throwing money at. So now, if that's the case, then are we in fact just creating a system where the only thing we've done is we've eliminated third parties selling us, but we've created a system in which we are permitted and indeed required to sell ourselves rather than our services? And given this law, you have to ask yourself whether in fact in that context, have we really progressed very far from these from the comfort that we had back in the days of indenture and indentured servitude and in the days of slavery, which is, of course, was much, much, much worse, but here modified.
That
right?
makes me scared though, because then if we are selling ourselves as bodies,
We're
then
permitted to sell ourselves in the name of freedom.
then that makes me think that this competition between everyone and wanting to work more and work harder and work longer is never going to end, because we're each trying to sell ourselves more and be
Right.
more, attractive to the buyer.
Right. So in this world of servants, then who's free? Right. And that becomes a problem. And indeed, even back in the battle days when we were having the what in retrospect is just a horrible conversation about the value of slavery versus versus paying quote unquote people in sweatshops in New England back in the 1840s and 1850s, right? For some people, the notion was, well, if you get down to brass tacks, the real difference between them is one, the interposition of third parties and the absolute control of the bodies, but two, the difference between now that you control the bodies absolutely, are you responsible for them, versus where you ostensibly are only purchasing a part of what the body produces, you're now not responsible for them and they become really fungible. If they don't serve you well, you can toss them and then hire someone else, or wait for the ships bringing immigrants in whose services, or that is whose servitude you can purchase for less money.
Yeah, you're in my head. So I was thinking, okay, so now if you've purchased our bodies, now then do you get to pay for our houses and our foods and our clothing? And
however crummy it is. And then we have this middle state, right, which appears to be coming back, especially among the youngsters who still who want to spend a lifetime pretending that they're still on a college campus.
All right, you need to stop that. Just because people don't want to have kids does not mean that they want to perpetually live on a college campus.
They do want to have kids. That means that they just move from the undergraduate dorm part to the married student dorm part of the campus. But that middle ground, where you're not back to chattel slavery, which is overt and crude, or the pretense of selling services when you're actually buying servitude, to this one that goes back to the notion of a century ago of developing all inclusive, all self-enclosed factory towns. They're prettier now. You go to certain sections of San Francisco, in buildings housed by certain companies that will remain nameless, where you can maintain your office, your health facilities, your doctor, your grocery store, your entertainment, all within a campus in which you are 24/7 involved in. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that businesses that have these huge spreads start calling their operating spaces campuses. It's not
Oh,
for
like small
nothing.
communities, like where you
Right,
don't have to
right,
move
right,
but 10
right,
feet to get
right.
whatever you want.
And so all of a sudden we go from the evil days of plantation slavery to the days in which that is not coerced and enforced by third parties, but like everything else within driven economies and driven production models, that that it's all done by your own consent.
Well, yes, and now that you spend less time going shopping for the things that you need, you can spend more time working for your buyer.
The purchaser of your service.
The purchaser of your services.
And servitude, right, which is made even worse, of course, because and even more obvious, since all of these people who supposedly are purchasing a commodity from you, since this is a commodity transaction, then reserve the right, ostensibly in the name of their own reputation, but this is nonsensical. And the fact that you've got 350 million people in this country who've actually bought this is just astonishing. They then have the right to protect their reputation by then controlling what you spew out in your own non-work arenas on social media or anywhere else, which is only a step above firing female teachers who got married because you disapprove of, or you had this vision of what your servants ought to be doing in terms of their appearance in the community. And then we're back to, well, what are you controlling? Are you controlling my body? You're controlling my life? Are you going to control who I marry, where my children are? You're going to control for scandal? You're going to control, oh, no, we're not doing this. But of course we are.
Yes. I mean, signals.
Right. So if that's the case, should we get excited about this brand new law that Portugal and then after France and Germany have passed, this no contact law, as porous as it may be?
Well, do we think that it will reach the United States, something similar?
Well, it doesn't matter.
I mean, I guess not.
I won't contact you, but how meaningful does that become in the broader context in which we accept and define the relations of power and control?
Signaling would be important.
Consensual. And then you develop these arenas in which signaling is necessary among all of those who have sold themselves, or sorry, their service, because we don't talk about it this way, who sold their services, who then perform, signaling both competition among their peer group and then signaling allegiance and fidelity, their willingness to sacrifice to those who are above them, who are in their own way, although much better compensated for it, also selling themselves in a lot of ways. And you know, to some extent, we're quite conscious of this. How many movies or TV shows or plays or dramas talk about the empty shell of a person who has kind of given themselves and become a husk of themselves? Hardly a husk. They made a choice, right? And they consented and they transformed themselves. But still, even at the very highest levels, that's the deal. And that's what we are willing to do, which then goes to our next podcast. Is there such thing, if possible, as individual autonomy in a system, even a free political system, whatever that means, in which the basis for being able to feed yourself is the knowledge that at some point and to someone you're going to have to consent to serve them or it depending on what it is.
I
or
think
who
you
it
just
is.
gave the answer.
Well, no, we're going to make it a lively discussion.
Okay, fine. We'll make it a lively discussion.
So any last thoughts? Or have I depressed you?
Well, it just takes a while to change culture. That's
Well, we've been at it for 30,000 years. What's another 30 or 40,000 years among friends?
you're right.
Say goodbye, Ariana.
Goodbye.